This is Dear Strategy, episode 147. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product, business, and personal strategy. I'm your host, Bob Caparelli. This is episode 147, being recorded in June of 2024. Welcome back, strategy creators, to another great episode. Today, we're going to cover a topic that was based on a question that was asked of me in a recent coaching session. I just had a coaching session, and the person that came to that session came prepared with a number of different questions. And some of them are things that I don't think I've answered on this show directly before. So I thought, let's go ahead and do it, right? So one of the questions that was asked, so this person is putting together a strategy based on the process that we've taught in many of our workshops and everything else. You can find all that available online. And I should make a shout out, because I don't do this enough. But this program, this podcast, is brought to you by Strategy Generation Company. That's the company that I founded. And this podcast is really a support system for that company. In other words, we do training and coaching and things like that. And I wanted to have a free resource that my clients could access, and also a free resource that other people can access that maybe allows them to find the company. So if you are interested in training, workshops, one-on-one coaching for strategy development and product management and product strategy, we do all of that. So please check us out at strategygeneration.com. And by the way, I should say, I say we, like we're some big company. I do most of the training and coaching and consulting. You know, I know that big companies want to work with big companies, but the truth of the matter is that when somebody is hiring a strategy consultant, they're not hiring a process. They're hiring a person who has experience, insights, a style that matches with what they're looking for. And I never really liked the model of, you go to a company, you like what they have to offer, you talk to the person who sometimes founded the company, you really connect with that person, and then they assign someone completely different to your coaching project. I mean, that someone might be very good, but that's not what you hired. You didn't hire a set of procedures, right? You hired a person. So I'm a pretty strong believer in that. And, we could get bigger. We certainly have demand, right? But I really feel like I want to stay with me being the primary provider of these services. So all that to say, if you come to strategygeneration.com, you're interested in coaching, consulting, training, you're going to get me, right? And so that's basically my model. But all of that aside, once you're done checking that out, let's get back to the subject at hand here. What was the question that was asked of me in this coaching session? And it was, hey, when you're setting objectives for your strategy, how do you ensure that those objectives are realistic objectives? And the conversation evolved from one of the workshops that I gave, where we were talking about the fact that many leaders and managers will provide you with objectives that are kind of stretch targets or stretch goals, right? Meaning they didn't give a lot of thought to how you're going to achieve it. They just kind of put it out there. Grow 10%, grow 15%. You figure out the rest. And I understand that that's a management style that exists. I understand people are trying to push people to the limits. And I understand that many leaders don't feel it's their job to come up with the details of how you're going to attain the goal. So I give you the goal, you figure it out, right? I get all that. I don't necessarily subscribe to that leadership style. I've talked about that in previous episodes on this podcast as well, but I get that it exists. What I always say, though, is that style cannot translate into strategy development. Why? Because for strategy development, you need to have objectives that align with your initiatives and your investments and everything that kind of follows it. So the general process is, do your situation analysis, tell us what your objectives are, and then put real initiatives in place that allows you to achieve the objectives based on what you think the situation is going to be when you go to execute your strategy. Then for those initiatives, put together investments, tell us what that's going to get us on a year-by-year basis, and that's your plan. So every piece of it has to align, which means that you can't have objectives that are unrealistic with respect to the actions and investments that you're asking for, right? You need to make sure that the actions and investments allow you to achieve your objectives. Again, that alignment is key. So that's the general process. So this question came down to, well, we get these kind of goals given to us on high, and then we put a strategy in place and basically find that those goals are unachievable, or in order to achieve those goals, we have to spend way more money than our leaders will ever give us access to. So what do we do? How do we turn those unrealistic goals into realistic goals? And so here's my general thought process outside of just saying, hey, make sure that you have some level of reality based on your situation analysis. There's actually some factors that you can triangulate to bring some realism to your objectives. And those factors generally include some combination of your price, your market, and your share. Okay. What do I mean by that? So if you're trying to achieve growth in your business, which is what most strategies will want you to do, right? Achieve some percentage of growth from your existing business to your future business. Then you can bridge that growth gap in those three categories, because your growth is going to come from some combination of those three things. Again, those three things are market, share, and price. So let's explain each one. So market is going to be how the market grows. Regardless of what you do, markets are going to grow. Demand is going to grow, right? Volume demand is going to grow. Or sometimes it shrinks, but let's just assume that it grows. And if you have a certain share and you maintain that share, or you assume that you maintain that share, then you should grow with the market. Your business should grow with the market. So if the market is expected to grow 2%, then your business should grow 2% as well, assuming that you don't change anything in your share position. So that's the market factor of growth. Then you have the share factor of growth, which is what percentage of that market will you actually be obtaining? So if you have a 30% share and you want to grow that by some amount, then you could say some component of your growth is coming from that share growth. Now, obviously, your percentage in share growth is not going to equate to your percentage in growth. Okay, so that's a little confusing. Let me kind of say that. Let's say you have 50% share of $1 million market, right? That means that your business is about $500,000. If you grow that share by 1 point, that's 1% of the market, right? So 1% of $1 million market is $10,000. So that means that you're growing your business $10,000. Now that doesn't represent your business growth, because remember your business was $500,000. So $10,000 of your $500,000 business represents 2% growth in your business. So in that particular example, because you have 50% share, a 1 point gain in market share is going to equal a 2% growth from your existing business to whatever you're going to be when you gain that share. So that's how that works, right? So the point is that you need to look at, in this factor, what percentage of your growth is going to be coming from market share increase, right? So that's you going out and getting additional share. So that's that second factor. Now, the third factor is price, because that's the other place that your revenue growth can come from. So in addition to market growth, in addition to share growth, you can also raise your prices. And so you could have some percentage of your business growth coming from price increases. So now when you put all that together, you can kind of you can break your business growth into these three categories and say, if I'm expecting to grow my business by 10%, meaning that I have an objective to grow my business by 10 points, okay? Then what I can do is say, what percentage of that is coming from each of these three categories? Let's say 5 points is coming from market growth. 5 points is going to come from share growth. Again, that's not a 5-point increase in share. It's 5% of your growth, 5 points of your business growth is going to come from share growth, whatever that equates to in share gain, right? And then nothing is coming from price. So then I can say that that's the way my growth components are going to be made up. 5 points from the market, 5 points from share, 0 points from price. I just use that as an example. You can modify that any way you want. So why is this analysis important? Because now this kind of breaks down that overarching target of 10% growth into some more meaningful and actionable categories that you can then get some reality checks on, right? And say, well, if I want 10% growth and I'm expecting that 5 points is going to come from the market, let me see what the market is predicted to do. Oh, wait a minute. The market's actually expected to shrink. So I'm going to have a 5-point decrease in my growth because the market is going to go down by 5%. So wait a minute. That means that I can't rely on that category. In fact, I have to offset that category, right? So now I can go to the share growth and say, okay, can I reasonably gain share in that kind of an environment? Well, if the market's going down, probably everybody's going to be fighting for keeping their share, which means I'm probably not going to be able to grow share in that environment without lowering my price tremendously, right? So I'm going to keep my share at about 0 points. And now I can say, can I raise price? Well, maybe in that environment, I can't raise price either because, everyone is going to be trying to lower their price to either maintain their share or get more share. So now my 10% growth target, which was a stretch target that came from nowhere, when I actually apply some science to it, I can see, wow, that's actually going to equate to a minus 5% growth, right? And so now when you're kind of left with that situation, now you can go out and say, well, how can I offset that? Well, maybe I can offset that by building new products, which eventually will turn into share growth, right? But you can put it into that category and say, this is a strategic initiative I could take to offset that negative growth that I would otherwise be subjected to. Or maybe I can go into new markets, right? And so that's another initiative I could take. By the way, those are probably the two big ones, the two big categories that you could use to offset any of those other three we talked about, new products or new markets. The problem with those, by the way, is that they're usually not short-term initiatives, right? Usually to get any traction from new products and new markets, it's going to be a 2, 3, even more year run for you to actually get some traction and get some results from that. So you may be facing a situation where, your leaders said we need 10 points of growth, but in fact, you can't actually reasonably obtain that in the forecasted market that you currently play in. That doesn't mean you give up, right? It means that, we have to put a bigger emphasis and a bigger priority on building new market or building new products, going into new markets or doing other initiatives that can offset some of these things. But that's kind of how you bring some reality to these objectives. So rather than just kind of setting your objectives at, hey, I'd like to get 10% growth. Okay, break it into those three categories and see how possible that is. Maybe it is possible. And maybe there are strategic initiatives you can take to obtain growth in one of those three categories or all three of those categories in the short term. But if that doesn't look like it's panning out, then you have to really put that longer term thinking cap on, which you should be doing anyway. And then get your business prepared for the fact that, no, we're not going to get 10% growth next year or this year, but we will, by taking these actions, be able to do that in the longer term. And that's what we need to set ourselves up for. This, by the way, this whole conversation is where most businesses go wrong, in my opinion, because they do try and put those stretch targets in place in environments where they're not reasonably going to obtain them. And then when they don't obtain them, they shuffle the deck chairs, right? And say, oh, that's because everything's broken. So let's go ahead and shuffle everything around and that will fix it. And it never fixes it, never fixes it. The reality is that businesses will ebb and flow. They go up and down. And so what you need to do as a strategist is think about what are those ebbs and flows going to be and think about how you offset that in the long term so that you can get long-term growth for your business rather than just focusing on the short term. When you put those long-term initiatives in place, then those things are already going to be built in to your growth plan. And then when you get to the point where you have to execute them, you'll be able to include them in your share growth category because you already accounted for them 2 or 3 years earlier. So that's kind of what I would suggest here, right? Again, make sure that you break down your growth targets into those 3 categories. Now, there's a lot of other objectives that you can apply stretch targets to. And so, we're only talking about revenue growth in this case, but, for the most part, the same kinds of theories can be applied to other objectives as well. This is going to be the most common one you run into. So this is the one that I wanted to answer with respect to. But any objective that you have a stretch target to, try and break it down into its logical components and see how attainable it really is. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully you have learned something from that. If you have a question that you want me to answer, if you have anything on your mind, please feel free to reach out. Go to dearstrategy.net, click on the contact link. That email comes right to me, and I will, if it's something we haven't answered already, I'll answer your question on the show and try and give you some insights that maybe you didn't have before. And while you're doing all that, don't forget to make time for the plan. We'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks again for joining.